Welcome to the church family that is lifting lives through living love, inspiring hope, filling with faith, and transforming our world. These recorded messages are made available so that you might have additional opportunities to stay connected with us and that you might learn and grow in your faith. God bless you as you hear the word today. And now, the message.
Good morning. My name is Linda Kraft, and our scripture this morning is from the first chapter of Ruth, verses 6 through 17. When Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, she and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her two daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show you kindness, as you have shown kindness to your dead husbands and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband." Then she kissed them goodbye, and they wept aloud and said to her, "We will go back with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has turned against me." At this, they wept aloud again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and to her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me." May the Lord add his blessing to the reading and the hearing of his word.
If this is your first Sunday joining us in a couple weeks, we're in a series called The Story of Our Faith, and each week we're reflecting on different kinds of stories of faith. Our first week, we talked about maybe the most basic story of all, the stories of salvation, the moments when God's grace and God's presence becomes real for us. And then last week, we talked about stories of call, when we become aware of God calling us to a specific task or purpose in the world. Today, we reflect on stories of faithfulness. In 2013, Disney's Frozen became the biggest, highest grossing animated film of all time, collecting $1.28 billion at the box office. I mean, that's just a staggering number. It's only been surpassed once in the years since by, of all things, Frozen 2, right? So it had this enormous success. And the question I asked, is what made that movie so successful? Yes, there was great music. My kids were in an age where Let It Go just played on a continuous loop in our car when we drive them around. So yes, the music was good, but it wasn't just the music. It was the story. Disney told a story which upended all the other stories it had told over the years. Now, if you don't know anything about Frozen, first off, where have you been? Have you been under a rock? It's the story of two sisters. The older of which is Elsa, who has these abilities to turn things frozen, hence the name of the movie. But her younger sister is named Anna. And Anna is just infatuated with this idea of romantic love. And can't wait to grow up and meet her prince. She's a princess, after all. And then when she finally does meet who she thinks is her prince, Prince Hans, she instantly falls in love and one day is ready to get married, which leads to a little bit of a fight between her and her sister Elsa. Elsa loses control of her ice powers in that moment, which is part of the theme of the movie, that she can't really control her powers very well. And in shame and fear, she flees from the kingdom and then leaves Arendelle, the kingdom, in a frozen wasteland, so to speak. So Anna chases after her up into the mountains to convince her to come back and undo this thing that she's done. And then when she finds her in her ice palace up in the mountains, again, another battle, misunderstanding ensues, and Elsa accidentally strikes her sister's heart with her frozen powers. And the only thing that can save her, we are told, is an act of true love. And so Anna races back to Prince Hans, her true love, right? And she's helped, of course, by Kristoff, who the whole time we know is really her true love. Like, can't she just open her eyes, you know? But it turns out neither is true, because the true love is actually Anna standing in front of her sister Elsa and protecting her, interposing herself in the case of harm. That's the act of true love that heals her heart and actually breaks the spell over Arendelle. Now, when you pause and think about the story, you see how revolutionary it is, because you think about it. For 75 years, Disney has been telling stories about true love, and they always involve some prince and some princess, and love's true kiss. And you know love in a moment, in a magical moment. And you sing songs about this is what love is. And yet in this story, the act of true love is not between a boy and a girl. It's not romantic at all. Instead, the true love is between two sisters who, in fact, had grown apart through all the years and didn't realize how much they loved each other. I found myself wondering if the creators of this story didn't draw some form of inspiration from the biblical story of Ruth. In the biblical story of Ruth, there is romantic love, right? Because there's the hunky, noble Boaz, he's the guy, right? And so part of the story is Ruth pursuing Boaz and being guided by Naomi to know how to capture his heart. But the story is not about Boaz. The story is about Naomi and Ruth. That's the center of the story. One woman, poor, outcast, no shelter or place to offer. The other, a foreigner who will not let her go. It's the relationship between these two women that forms the emotional heart of the story. That's what we are meant to reflect upon. I've shared this with you before, but my favorite Hebrew word is hesed. A close second is tzitzit, which means tassel. It's just fun to say, tzitzit. But hesed is my first favorite Hebrew word. It means steadfast love. It's the word that they most often ascribe to God, to God's nature, the nature of God's love. It's a little different from the New Testament word, which most of us are more familiar with, agape, meaning unconditional love. Hesed is, like I said, it's steadfast love. It's loyalty, it's covenant faithfulness. The idea behind hesed is that you bind yourself to someone else with a promise. And hesed is holding on to that promise, showing up, being faithful to them no matter what. I heard it described when I was in seminary that if agape is love with no strings attached, then hesed is love with lots of strings attached, super duper strings attached that cannot be broken no matter what happens. This is the love that the Hebrews ascribed to their God. The most common affirmation in the Old Testament, it appears multiple times in Chronicles and Psalms, is give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love, his hesed, endures forever. That's the kind of love that the people celebrated between them and Yahweh their God, a love which cannot ever be broken. And it's this kind of hesed that Ruth and Naomi share with each other. When Ruth marries Naomi's son, she enters into a covenant not just with the son, but with the son's family. So she is bound by covenant to Naomi. But then disaster strikes. Not only does Naomi's husband Elimelech die, but But then her two children, Mahlon and Chilion, die as well, which means that now it's just Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth, the three women. And Naomi knows that this is, there's nowhere for them to go. They have no source of income, no property. The only thing Naomi can do is return back to her hometown, to the region of Bethlehem. But she knows this is no life to offer to her daughters-in-law. And so in an act of hesed, covenant loyalty and faithfulness, putting them before her, she releases them from the covenant. She says, go back. Go back, my daughters, to your kinsmen, to your homes. You are still young and pretty. You can find husbands. You can have a future. Not so for me, but don't let me be the one pulling you down. Go back. And Orpah weeps because she knows Naomi loves her. And yet she leaves. Ruth, meanwhile, though, will not leave. She stays. Despite Naomi's urging, go away, go away. See, this is the way it is for Ruth. You can let go of your end of the covenant, Naomi, but I'm not letting go of mine. In fact, she doubles down and makes a covenant, not to Naomi's son, but to Naomi personally. And she says, where you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. And your people will be my people. Your God will be my God. Ruth is an outsider. She's a foreigner. She is not part of the Hebrew people. She is not part of God's promise and covenant. And yet, by her faithfulness to a covenant, she is made part of the promise and the story of the people of Israel. She would even go on to become the great-grandmother to King David. That's the power of Hesed. It changes the story. Ruth sticks no matter what. One of my favorite authors and essayists and novelists is a guy named Wendell Berry. And Wendell Berry, in one of his essays, he makes this distinction. He says, all people can be divided roughly into two categories, boomers and stickers, he calls them. Now, when he says boomers, he's not talking about the generation, okay, boomer, like he's not talking about that kind of boomer. He's talking about boomers as we kind of understand the original was as a period or time of rapid expansion. And specifically, he talks about the gold boom. And he says, boomers are people who are always moving to what's next, what's best. And so they move into an area or a territory and they mine it for all it's worth. They take all the good out, and then when it's empty and just a husk of itself, then they move on to what's next. Boomers are always motivated by greed, power, money. They are always using people and places and careers and relationships for whatever they can get out of them, and then when they're empty, they move on to the next. He says, in contrast to boomers, you have stickers. And stickers are not motivated by use, what they can get out of something. Stickers are motivated by loyalty and affection. They stick with a place, and they love that place, and they love the people and the animals with which they share that place. And even when times are hard, they stick, because their goal is to preserve the goodness and beauty of the land and the people where they live, and they seek to pass that on to the next generation. Whenever I think about Ruth, I think about that distinction, because Ruth is the quintessential sticker. She sticks even when times are hard. She sticks in the midst of loss, right? Elimelech, Mahlon, Chilion, all three die. The emotional grief of that, it would have been so easy for her to leave, just to close the page on that emotional hurt. But she sticks through loss. She sticks through scarcity. Remember, women in that time couldn't own property. There was no source of income, no way of means of support for these three women. The whole reason that Naomi and Elimelech came to Moab in the first place because there was a famine back in Bethlehem. And now they're going back to that place with nothing but the shirts on their back. Incredible scarcity, and yet she sticks. And she sticks in the midst of uncertainty. She doesn't know what the future holds. In fact, as far as Naomi's concerned, the future is over. I have no heir that I can give you so that you can have children. The family line is done. It's not just uncertainty, it's certain loss, death into the line. And yet in the face of loss, scarcity, uncertainty, Ruth sticks. And when I think about those three words, loss, scarcity, uncertainty, to me that's what connects this ancient story to today's reality. I mean, how much are we living with loss, scarcity, uncertainty right now? Every single one of us probably knows someone that's lost a loved one to COVID. Or maybe if they haven't physically, lost them by death, just by separation, the loss of being able to visit and see one another, that loss is tremendous, the emotional grief of that. Every single one of us has known someone who's dealt with scarcity, who's lost their job or taken a pay cut, who's now getting by on much less. And how many of us, I think all of us, are living with uncertainty. When is the vaccine gonna come? What's gonna happen 2 days from now in the election? And what's that gonna mean for the stock market? What's it gonna mean for our future? I mean, we are living with loss, scarcity, and uncertainty. And to me, the story of Ruth shows us a pathway to navigate those three things. And the pathway is this: faithfulness. When we choose to stick, when we choose to be faithful, when we choose hesed, we choose a better story. I think about all the candles that we lit today and how each one of them represents a story of faithfulness. And I don't have the time to do all 50, but let me share with you a few of the stories. We lit a candle today for Norval Dixon. And Norval is a gentle and good man. He loved his children. He loved his grandchildren and great-grandchildren. He would always come into the church and he would buy DVDs each week because he wanted to ship them to all of his children and grandchildren who he thought might be encouraged by the message. I think about Bob Carnicellum. I don't know how many of you knew Bob. Bob dealt with cancer in his back before I arrived here as pastor, and then it kind of came out of remission and had a second turn this last year. Every time I visited Bob, he was in incredible pain, and yet he had such deep faith. He always said to me, Pastor, I want to stand in front of that church and I want to testify to the healing of God. And he never got that opportunity, but I stand in his place to say he received healing of a different sort. I think about Sandra Shoemaker. Randy sitting over there. I've never seen a family love their mother or wife the way the Shoemakers love Sandra. I mean, she's just adored. She was a pioneer in education and integration, worked with IPS schools. What I loved about Sandra is towards the end of her life, when she was in kind of nursing home care, she hated it, right? And yet every person that walked in her door, every staff member, she knew not just where they were from, who they were, their name, but she knew where they were from. She asked about their family, even if they lived in different countries. She just loved people. I think about Phyllis Quick. I didn't know Phyllis very well. Many of you probably knew Phyllis much better than me. By the time I arrived here as pastor, she was pretty far advanced as far as her dementia. But what I knew about Phyllis was the care she received from her family. From Dave, from Jennifer, from even her caregivers. Sarah Thompson was one of her caregivers. The thing about Phyllis is that she took a long time to eat. I mean, like hours to finish a meal. And the staff couldn't devote that kind of time to a single patient. And so every meal, it was either Sarah Thompson or one member of her family. And every time I went, almost invariably, I found Dave Quick there. And Dave wasn't just feeding her food. He always set up his phone and he was playing music, which I imagine in their younger days they would have danced to or sung to. And he would relive these old memories, reminding her of who she was as he fed her meals. I think of Jim James, who was a pillar in our church along with his wife, Pat. Every time I talked to Pat, she would say, I lost my boyfriend, that he was so faithful to her. She couldn't imagine anyone who could be better to her than Jim was. I think about Dorothy Crane. Dick is also here this morning. And I didn't know Dorothy, same reason. She was pretty far advanced in her dementia by the time I arrived, but I remember talking to Dick right after COVID hit. And he wasn't able physically to go visit her because COVID shut down the healthcare unit, and yet he would go and stand outside her window, and sometimes the caregiver would open up so he could talk to her. And I know that's not unique for Dick. Many people since, I've heard stories of people doing that, but Dick was one of the first ones I heard of, just the faithfulness of showing up. I think of Bishop Coyner and Reverend Bob Wright. I didn't know Bob very well, but I knew Bishop Mike very well. Two men who laid down their lives for the sake of the church, for the faith of others. And like I said, I've barely scratched the surface. I mean, Cherry Watson, Jim Miller, Debbie McCumber, Tony Rodolfo, Dan Farrell, these are all people whose services I presided over, and all of them were filled with beautiful memories. But the thread that ran through every member, through every memory, was faithfulness. It was Hesed. The stories weren't about booming, about what they accomplished and what they did. They were always about how they loved those with whom they shared life. And that brings it full circle back to us. Because I think anytime we remember the saints, we're meant to ask, what is our story? What's the story that we're going to pass on to the next generation? What's going to be said one day about us? And if all of our stories are about booming, about what we accomplished and what we did, let me tell you, those stories are pretty thin, and they fade from memory and significance very fast. The stories that last, the stories that matter, are the stories of faithfulness and Hesed. It's the stories of the people we stuck with and who stuck by us no matter what. And I know these are challenging times, right? But the one thing about COVID is it gives us a million opportunities to live out faithfulness with others. I think about Stephanie Brooks' story, who's just one representative of all the frontline workers who chose faithfulness, who kept showing up, even if they didn't have the PPE equipment that they needed, right? I think about people in our church. There's a whole team of women who were sewing masks by the thousands so that people would have the equipment they needed to be. That's a story of faithfulness. I think about the people I know in our church. There's so many who've stayed in touch with those that COVID has put up a wall, and they found ways around that wall, whether it's by Zoom or whether it's by FaceTime or whether it's just showing up and waving at windows so that people know they're not forgotten. I think of all the quiet, unspoken ways that people have been kind to their neighbor and provided childcare, emotional support, or just being a friend in time of need. How do we demonstrate and choose faithfulness? Because that's what our stories are really about. And the great news, the good news we cling to no matter what, is that the author of our stories is faithful too. Yes, these times are hard, and sometimes our hearts get broken, but the author of the story never abandons us. He walks with us, he holds us, and he leads us into a better tomorrow. Many of you know the old hymn, "Great is thy faithfulness, O God our Father. Morning by morning, new mercies I see. All I have needed, thy hand hath provided. Great is your faithfulness, Lord, unto me." May that be the hymn, the refrain of each of our lives.
Hi, I'm Laura Bruckman, and I'm the music director here at ZUMC. Every story has a main character. And in a faith story, God is certainly the central character. You would think that in my faith story, I would be the other main character. But I've recently learned that I'm not. My mom is. I didn't grow up in a church-centered family. We weren't praying at dinner. We weren't going to church every Sunday. We weren't even talking about God. But I was brought up to put others in front of myself, to respect people, to give to others, and most importantly, to be kind. I learned those things from my mom and my dad. but they were just things that I was and that I tried to do and I saw them do. In 2004, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I never saw her be negative. Now you would think, oh, she's in denial, she's just pretending like she's okay. She truly 100% had a positive attitude. And for the next 16 years, she was diagnosed with 2 more primary cancers. She was diagnosed with end-stage emphysema. She constantly was positive. She constantly was putting others first. If you asked her how she was, she'd say, "I'm great, how are you?" She loved her grandchildren. She lived to help others. She lived to love others. A year and a half ago, her cancer metastasized. I quit my job so that I could help them navigate a world of medicine, appointments, doctors, and I got to spend a lot more time with my mom. And I started realizing that all those things that my mom taught me to be, that sometimes made me mad when I was little. What do you mean I have to put someone first? I want to talk about me, Mom. I'm the one who's hurting. I realized that she really lived and walked the talk. So this past summer, she started getting more sick, and she never complained. She constantly was putting others first. She was always asking about us, me, my brother, my sister, our families, her grandchildren. She reached out to friends. She constantly had a positive attitude. One day last year, Dave asked the staff kind of about our beginnings in the church and our faith stories. And I think that was the first time that I realized that my mom was my faith story. My mom taught me how to behave. And through the years, I was taught while going to church that God made us in His image, and God is love, and God expects us to treat our neighbors as ourselves. But what I didn't realize until recently was my mom lived that image, my mom was that image, and my mom taught me, without saying what it was, to live and be that image. My mom taught me to the last breath she took that she was love, and I know God made us in His image. And by showing me what love was through my mom's behavior, Mom taught me that God was love. I'm Laura Bruckman, and this is my story.